The sun had barely risen over the prestigious Liberty Military Academy in Virginia. Cadet Alina Brooks stood at attention in the middle of the courtyard, her blue eyes sharp and steady, her dark blonde hair neatly tied back. She had just completed her morning drills, but her mind wasn't on push-ups or formation commands today. Donald Trump was scheduled to visit the academy as part of his ongoing nationwide Future Leaders Initiative. The news had sent a ripple of excitement through the cadets for Alina. It meant something more personal. She had waited 2 years for this. Ever since she joined the academy at 18, Alina had carried a question in her heart. A question she never dared ask her commanding officers, let alone her peers. But now, as a 20-year-old rising cadet and squad leader, she felt ready while other cadets chatted about politics and policies. Alina was more concerned about purpose, not just her own, but the deeper meaning behind service loyalty and sacrifice. Her question wasn't about promotions or politics. It was about identity. As the preparations began, a buzz of Secret Service agents and military personnel filled the base. A makeshift stage was being set up in front of the main hall. Flags fluttered in the morning breeze. Cadets were told to line up and be on their best behavior. As she stood with her peers, heart pounding, Alina clutched the tiny note card in her pocket, the one on which she had written her question 2 years ago. She had no idea if she'd get the chance to ask it, but if she did, it would change everything. As the motorcade approached, cadets snapped into perfect posture, flags were lowered in salute, and the courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Donald Trump, now back in office and focused on leadership development, stepped onto the academy grounds with a confident stride. He was older than Alina had remembered from the news, but his presence was just as commanding. His security details scanned the crowd while academy brass briefed him on the day's events. The program began with formalities, a brief speech from the academy's headmaster, a showcase of cadet achievements, and a few ceremonial salutes. Cadets were told to maintain formation, smile respectfully, and avoid unnecessary movement. Alina didn't move, but she couldn't stop her heart from racing. Then something unexpected happened. President Trump asked, "Are there any cadets here with questions?" "Real ones, not the kind you think I want to hear." A long silence followed. Everyone looked around. No one moved until Alina's hand slowly rose. An officer gave her a sharp look, but "President Trump noticed you, cadet," he said, pointing. "You've got guts, come up here." Gasps echoed through the courtyard. Alina's boots clicked against the pavement as she walked toward the stage. Eyes wide, hands cold. She didn't expect this. She had only hoped for a brief handshake, maybe a letter handed over. Now she stood face to face with the President of the United States, holding the note card in her trembling fingers. "Go ahead." Trump said, lowering the mic toward her. "What's your question?" Her mouth went dry. She looked around. Everyone was watching. Then slowly she unfolded the note card and read the words that had haunted her for 2 years. "Sir, how do you know if your purpose is real or just what others expect of you?" The air in the courtyard thickened with silence. Cadet Alina Brooks had just asked the most honest, vulnerable question the president had heard that day, or maybe in years Trump didn't answer. Immediately he stared at her, then stepped back from the microphone. He folded his arms, looked out at the crowd, and then back at Alina. "That's a real question," he finally said. "That's not rehearsed, that's from the gut." Alina nodded nervously, biting the inside of her cheek. "I get asked all the time about success," Trump began. "About strategy, leadership, money, but very few people ask me about purpose. That's dangerous terrain." Cadets leaned forward, intrigued. He turned back to Alina. "Let me ask you something. When you wake up in the morning and lace up those boots, who are you doing it for?" She hesitated. "Sometimes I don't know. My dad served. My mom says this uniform suits me. My commanders say I've got potential. But some nights I lie awake and wonder if I'm becoming who I want to be, or who I'm supposed to be for everyone else that struck a nerve." Trump nodded slowly. "You want the truth?" Most people never ask that question. They just run on tracks laid down by someone else and call it purpose, but real purpose doesn't come from outside. He looked around the crowd. It's quiet. It's inconvenient. It wakes you up at 2 a.m. and makes you doubt things. Everyone else seems sure about. Alina felt seen in a way she hadn't before. Then he said something she didn't expect. "I had the same question once," he confessed, "and it changed my life." Alina blinked. "You had the same question?" Trump nodded. "Not in a uniform like yours, but yes, I was 30. had wealth building's headlines, but I didn't know if I was building what I wanted or what the world told me I should want. He paced slowly across the small stage one night. I stayed up in my office, just me, a notebook, and a question I couldn't escape. If all this disappeared tomorrow, would I still know who I am? That line hit Alina like a wave. I realized something important that night, he continued. People think purpose is loud, that it's fame, recognition, applause, but purpose is quiet. It's what you're willing to do when no one's clapping. A gentle breeze blew through the flags as he spoke, almost like nature itself had leaned in. I lost deals after that night. Trump said, turned down offers, walked away from noise. People thought I was being arrogant. I was actually trying to be honest. Alina listened, holding her breath. I rebuilt but differently, with more clarity. Not for headlines, but for legacy. That's when things truly began to matter. There was no teleprompter, no notes, just a man sharing a chapter of vulnerability that the public rarely saw. He looked directly at Alina. You're young, but asking that question now means you're way ahead of the game. Then he stepped closer and said quietly, what you choose to do next will define you. Not the uniform, not the medals. Not even your title, just that quiet choice. The entire academy courtyard was silent. The courtyard remained still. But inside Elena's chest, something stirred. She had come expecting a handshake, a photo maybe, but she had walked right into something deeper, into a truth that had waited years to find her. Trump leaned closer, lowering his voice so only she and a few nearby cadets could hear. There's one thing I want you to remember, he said. You can earn medals for doing what others expect, or you can earn meaning by doing what your soul expects. One path gets applause, the other gets peace. Alina felt her eyes sting. He straightened up, looked out at the crowd, and then gestured for her to step down. Cadet Brooks asked a question every leader should ask. I hope you all remember that a ripple of murmurs followed her as she returned to formation. Fellow cadets patted her shoulder, nodded or smiled in admiration, but her mind was far away from the cheers. The microphones, the ceremony, that whisper from Trump. Peace over applause kept echoing later that evening. As cadets gathered in the lounge, the moment was all anyone could talk about. Videos had gone viral. Alina's name was trending across social platforms. She had become a symbol of thoughtful courage, but while others celebrated the attention, Alina sat quietly in her dorm notebook. Open heart, open wider. She crossed out her old career plan, the one filled with steps, medals, and milestones, and started a new page at the top. She wrote just one sentence: lead from the inside, or be led from the outside. The question had been hers, but the answer that was just beginning to change everything the next morning. Alina Brooks woke up before her alarm. She sat on the edge of her bed staring at the blank pages in her notebook. Something about yesterday had shifted her entire internal compass. She didn't feel different on the outside, still the same boots, same schedule, same sharp bun, but inside a quiet storm had passed. She thought back to President Trump's words. Peace. Over applause, lead from the inside, as cadets rushed around getting ready for drills. Several greeted her with new respect. Some asked how it felt to speak directly to the president. A few asked what she was planning to do next. Alina didn't have an answer. Not yet. At breakfast, Lieutenant Carson, one of the more respected officers, sat across from her and lowered his voice. You know, I've seen a lot of cadets chase promotions and prestige, but the way you stood up there, that took more than courage, that took honesty, rare quality. Alina smiled faintly. I didn't expect any of this. That's how real purpose usually starts. He said, with a question you don't want to ask, and an answer you can't ignore later that day. She declined several interview requests. She wasn't interested in becoming a viral story. She just wanted to understand what her story meant. That evening, she found a quiet bench near the Academy Chapel and sat with her thoughts. The sunset spilled gold across the trees, and in that quiet moment, she whispered to herself, I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I know I'm not going backward. It was a beginning. In the following weeks, something remarkable began to happen. Cadet Alina Brooks, once quiet and task-focused, started to lead differently. Not louder, not harsher, but deeper. Instead of barking orders, she listened more. She noticed the cadet who always stayed late after drills, the one who struggled silently in PT, and the one who hid her anxiety behind jokes. Her squad noticed too. She's changed, one cadet whispered to another. But not like different, just more real. And it wasn't just in drills. Alina started an informal group she called Midnight Compass. It wasn't on the schedule, it wasn't mandatory, but every Friday night cadets gathered in an empty lecture room. No uniforms, no ranks, just real talks about purpose, stress, doubt, and direction. They talked about fears they never voiced before. Am I good enough? What if I'm doing this for the wrong reasons? Will I lose myself? Trying to become who they expect me to be. Alina didn't have all the answers, but she asked the right questions, and that gave others permission to be honest too. One night, Lieutenant Carson dropped by and sat in the back. He didn't speak, just listened afterward. He approached Alina. You're doing more with 10 cadets in a quiet room than some leaders do with a microphone? Alina smiled. I think it's because I stopped trying to be impressive, I just started trying to be honest. He nodded. Don't underestimate the power of that. Honesty changes rooms. Alina went to sleep that night not with clarity, but with calm. She didn't need a perfect plan. She just needed to keep walking her truth. 3 weeks after the president's visit, Alina was summoned to the front office by the academy's headmaster. When she arrived, the receptionist handed her a navy blue envelope with the presidential seal. It came by courier. The woman whispered, eyes wide. He wrote it himself. Alina's hands trembled. As she opened the envelope, inside was a single letter typed, but with a handwritten signature at the bottom. Cadet Brooks, you asked me. A question that stirred something in me. I've spoken on stages across the world, but few moments stayed with me like the one we shared. Purpose isn't something handed to you, it's discovered through asking, wrestling, and walking. Especially when the road is unclear, you reminded me of that. I've instructed my team to launch a new pilot program. Quiet Leaders Initiative aimed at spotlighting individuals across the country who lead not through popularity but through principle. I'd like you to be the first cadet featured. You won't need a camera crew or stage lights. Just your true speak when you're ready. We'll be listening. Keep leading from the inside. Donald J. Trump. Alina stared at the letter, overwhelmed. Not with pride, but with something else, responsibility. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about creating space for others to ask their own questions. She folded the letter, placed it carefully into her journal, and whispered, Okay, let's begin. The Academy arranged a small event for the new Quiet Leaders Initiative. It wasn't grand, just a modest gathering of cadets as faculty and a few guests from Washington. Alina was asked to speak. She walked up to the podium wearing her full uniform. The spotlight made her squint, but her voice was steady as she began. I'm not here to give a speech, she said. I'm here to give back a question. She looked out at the crowd. 2 years ago, I wrote a question on a note card. I didn't know if I'd ever ask it. I was scared. Scared that maybe the answer would undo everything I was trying to become. She paused, but I asked it. And instead of answers, I found something better. Direction, not certainty, but honesty. The room was quiet. I've learned that leadership isn't about sounding confident. It's about staying curious. It's about asking the questions. Everyone's too afraid to say out loud, Alina. Then pulled the original note card from her journal and held it up. This is the question that changed everything. How do you know if your purpose is real or just what others expect of you? Heads nodded slowly, a few eyes shimmered with tears. I still don't have a perfect answer. But I know one thing. If you're asking, you're already on the right path. She stepped back, not to applause, but to something deeper. A standing silence. The weeks that followed were different. Not louder, not busier, just clearer. Alina continued leading her squad, attending classes and hosting the Midnight Compass group. But something new began to happen. Cadets from other me's started reaching out, emails, messages, even letters. I saw your speech. I've had that question too, can we talk? One came from a young Air Force recruit in Colorado. Another from a Navy officer struggling with burnout. They didn't want advice, they just wanted permission, to be honest. Alina didn't call herself a mentor, she called herself a mirror. I don't tell them who to be. She said to Lieutenant Carson one day, I just help them see what they've been carrying inside all along. He looked at her proudly. That's leadership. The rarest kind. Soon the Quiet Leaders Initiative gained attention. Not flashy media coverage, but real stories. Stories of people leading food, drives mentoring kids, starting honest conversations in their communities. President Trump even mentioned Alina during a national youth leadership address. She asked one question, he said, and started a ripple back at Liberty Academy. Alina watched the live stream in her dorm curled up in her blanket. She wasn't chasing titles or medals anymore. She was building something more lasting, a life built on quiet courage, a legacy made not from applause but from alignment. With growing attention came resistance. Some senior cadets began whispering behind Elena's back. A few even called her the president's favorite in a sarcastic tone. Others claimed she was trying to brand herself rather than serve quietly like the rest. Alina tried to ignore it, but the tension grew louder one afternoon. During strategy drills, a fellow cadet named Harris muttered under his breath, "Maybe if we all asked big emotional questions, we'd get our own initiatives too." Alina turned to him calmly. "If you have something to say, say it." Harris paused. You've become something else, bigger than the team, bigger than the academy." Alina nodded slowly. "That's fair. I've changed, but I never stopped being a cadet. I just realized there's more to serve than uniforms and routines. People are struggling silently if we're not addressing that. What are we even protecting?" The room fell quiet later. Harris approached her in the mess hall, awkward but sincere. "Maybe I was out of line, I guess. I just felt left behind." Alina smiled gently. "You weren't. In fact, you were the kind of person I was trying to reach. I don't need to be the face of anything. I just want more people to stop pretending everything's fine." He nodded, understanding slowly. "Dawning Midnight Compass still open always?" She replied. The pushback hadn't broken her. It had refined her. She realized that real leadership would always attract resistance. But if you led with truth and humility, the right people would find their way back to you. Even the doubters one afternoon. Just as classes ended, Alina was called into the dean's office to her surprise president. Trump was on a video call waiting for her cadet Brooks. He greeted with a warm smile. "I hear Midnight Compass is turning into a movement." Alina chuckled nervously, just trying to help people ask better questions. "That's the heart of it," he said, "and I'd like to visit again this time, not for cameras, just to listen." A week later, without press or fanfare, President Trump arrived on campus. No stage, no crowd, just him. A few advisors and an open chair in the Midnight Compass circle. Cadets were stunned, but he set the tone quickly tonight. "I'm not a politician. I'm just another person, still figuring things out," and they talked about self-doubt, about pressure, about moments. They almost quit. One cadet asked him, "Have you ever felt like you weren't enough no matter what you did?" Trump nodded thoughtfully. "More times than you'd guess, but I've learned the loudest critics usually live in your own head, and once you make peace with them, the rest of the world quiets down too." The room was still. Alina watched the president not as a world figure, but as a man offering honesty in return for theirs. Afterward, he pulled her aside. "What you've started here, this matters long after uniforms fade or titles change." Alina smiled. "It's not about me, it's about giving people space to be who they are." He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Exactly, and that's leadership. This country needs more of a month." Later, Alina received a call from the Department of Defense cadet Brooks. The voice on the line said, "We're forming a youth military advisory panel, voices from the field, from people who actually lived the life your name came up repeatedly." She was stunned. "I'm honored. But why me? You represent something rare, insight without ego. Your message is shaping how young leaders see themselves." Alina paused. "Will I still be a cadet?" "Absolutely. In fact, that's why it matters. We want your perspective before the medals and titles." When she shared the news with her squad, they erupted into cheers. Even Harris clapped the loudest. Later that night, sitting on her bunk, Alina stared at the ceiling, wondering what this all meant. She didn't feel more capable than anyone else, but maybe that was the secret. Leadership wasn't about being the best. It was about being honest enough to represent the rest. That week, she traveled to D.C. for her first panel meeting. She wore her uniform, but brought her note card with her, the same one she'd shown in her speech during the meeting. When asked what changes she would suggest, she held up the card. "Start by helping cadets ask this question and make space for them to actually hear the answer." One general leaned in and said quietly, "That might be the beginning of everything." Word of Midnight Compass spread beyond Liberty Academy. Other Army, Navy, Air Force began hosting their own versions. They called them different names: the Inner Room's Silent Strength, Purpose Forum, but the heart was the same. Young leaders wanted more than commands and drills, they wanted space to be human. Alina started receiving invitations to speak not as an expert, but as a storyteller. She told them about her note card, her fear the silence before she spoke. The answer that changed everything. She met a cadet from Texas who confessed he was thinking of dropping out until he heard her speak. I thought I was broken. He said no. She smiled. You're just brave enough to question one girl. A naval trainee said, I want to lead like you. Not with noise, but with stillness. Alina replied, then you already are. The movement was no longer hers. It belonged to every cadet who whispered, me too. And that she realized was the goal all along. Not a spotlight, but a torch, passed quietly from hand to hand. Lighting rooms no one knew were dark. She wasn't famous, but she was known in the quiet, meaningful way that lasts. She had become the kind of leader she used to wish she could find, and now others were finding her on the anniversary of the day she asked her question. Alina sat alone under a tree behind the academy chapel. She opened her journal and wrote a letter, not to the president, not to her mentors, but to herself. Dear Cadet Brooks, you were terrified and you asked anyway. You didn't know what would happen, but you asked the question anyway. Now look around. It wasn't the answer that changed your life. It was the courage to ask. You've learned that silence can lead as powerfully as speeches, that peace is more valuable than popularity, and that being honest might just be the bravest kind of leadership there is. No matter where you go next, don't forget who you were before the applause, and don't stop asking questions, especially the ones that make your hands shake with pride. Future you. She closed the journal and smiled, tears warming her eyes not from sadness but from gratitude. The journey had just begun months. Past Midnight Compass became an official program within Liberty Academy and other schools across the nation. Alina remained humble, still reporting for drills, still pulling night duty, still polishing her boots alongside everyone else. One morning, a new cadet named Riley, fresh from orientation, approached her nervously. You're Cadet Brooks, right? Alina smiled. That's me. I've been wanting to ask, how did you know the president would listen? Alina paused, considering the question carefully. I just knew I needed to speak. Not for him to hear, but for me to stop hiding. Riley looked down at her boots. I get nervous. Speaking up feels like I'll say something stupid. Alina laughed gently. You will. We all do. But saying nothing at all, that's where we lose ourselves. Riley nodded slowly. I joined. Because I wanted to protect people, but sometimes I feel like I'm not enough. Alina placed a hand on her shoulder. That means you're exactly who we need later that night. Riley attended her first Midnight Compass meeting. She didn't speak, but she listened. Her eyes shone with understanding. Alina saw herself in the new cadet. Not just the fear, but the spark. And she knew the torch had found its next hand. Alina was invited to speak at a national military leadership conference. It would be the biggest audience yet. Officers, generals, senators, and students alike. She was given the option to use a teleprompter. She declined as she stepped up to the podium. Her heart raced, but then she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out the same worn note card. She held it up. This, she began, is the only speech I ever needed. The room fell silent. I asked President Trump this one question. How do I lead when I still feel lost inside? His answer wasn't magical. It didn't fix everything. But it reminded me that leadership doesn't mean pretending to be unshakable. It means being real enough to let others be seen. She looked around the room, locking eyes with generals and young cadets alike. We train for battle, for diplomacy, for crisis. But how often do we train to lead with honesty? A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. I'm not here because I'm the strongest or the smartest. I'm here because one day I asked something that scared me, and then listened. Really listened to the answer. The audience rose to their feet, a standing ovation. Not for show, but for truth. After the conference, President Trump invited Alina to a quiet dinner. No cameras. Just a personal thank you. Over steak and potatoes, he leaned in. You know, when you asked that question, I didn't have a perfect answer. I just gave you what I had. Alina smiled. That was enough. He nodded. Sometimes I wonder if we underestimate the power of answering as human beings first and leaders second. They spoke about the weight of expectation, about growing up under scrutiny, about the unseen cost of leadership. You turned a moment into a mission, Trump said, and you did it without chasing credit. That's rare. Alina looked out the window. I don't need credit. I just want others to stop hiding their doubt like it's weakness. He paused, then said something she never expected. Have you considered applying for the President's Leadership Fellowship? Her eyes widened. I didn't think I'd qualify. You've already proven you do. It wasn't about prestige, it was about continuing the work on a bigger scale. And in that moment, Alina realized she wasn't at the end of her journey. She was at the beginning of her purpose back at Liberty Academy. A mural was painted in the main hall. It wasn't of Alina's face, it was of the note card. Just 5 words, how do I lead? When below it, cadets scribbled their own questions on sticky notes, forming a living wall of wonder, doubt, and hope. Alina stood silently watching as a group of new students read the wall. Riley approached her and handed her a note. Alina unfolded it. What if my real strength is still hidden? She smiled. That's a beautiful start. Midnight Compass now had trained leaders circles across every academy and even video prompts used during orientation. But more than that, it had created a culture, a place where asking hard questions became a sign of courage, not weakness. Years from now, no one might remember the moment she first spoke to the president, but the impact it would ripple in the lives of every cadet brave enough to ask their own question. One quiet evening, Alina stood by the lake behind the academy. Watching the sunset, she took out a fresh note card and stared at it for a moment. Then with a deep breath, she wrote a new question. What legacy do I want to leave behind? She folded it and placed it in her pocket. Not for anyone else, just for her. That night, a message arrived. She'd been officially selected for the Presidential Leadership Fellowship. Her journey would now take her to new rooms, bigger tables, but her compass would remain the same. At her graduation, she gave a brief speech. No long stories, just her voice steady and clear. If you want to change your path, start with one question. One real scary, honest question. Then stay still long enough to hear the answer. It might change everything. As she stepped off the stage, her fellow cadets chanted, Midnight Compass, find your north. And Alina Brooks smiled, not for the applause, but because she knew someone out there right now was holding a note card ready to begin.